Hello, my name's Ulurotimi Osha. I like to talk about American presidents, and I'm continuing with my discussion on the uh, leadership qualities in the Bible that translates to leadership qualities of American presidents. Presidents. Um, so, in business school, in business environments, modern business environments, these leadership qualities, they go by another name. They call them success factors, KSFs, key success factors. That you can find make a successful leader. So again, the Bible is replete with so many leaders, right? That and they displayed certain qualities that many authors, many executives have been able to um, they've been able to extract, right? Extract and uh, delineate to create some kind of to create guideposts for as guidance for other leaders, right? So they and in business school they call them key success factors, these leadership qualities, and you can see when you juxtapose leaders in the Bible, these key success factors that you can draw from the leaders in the Bible, you will be able to find these same qualities in many American presidents. And of course, that's why I decided to do some of these videos. Of course, I'm a student of the Bible. I love the Bible. And of course, I attend a Bible believing church. So what we do in that church is, we study the Bible over and over, and analyze it. It's filled with scholars, professors, and so there's a scientific approach to studying the Bible. So I love studying the Bible. And of course, when I was in school a long time ago in Nigeria, I actually took history of the church. I did history of religions. So as a personal thing, apart from uh, my personal faith, my religious life, um, as an academic exercise, I like to study, the Bible as well and the leaders in the Bible and compare them to other, world leaders. So you see some consistent qualities in world leaders, whether it's their love of learning, whether it's their ability to communicate with their acolytes, whether it's their compassion, whether it's their humility, whether it's their ability to demonstrate resilience in times of crisis. So these are things that we can draw, we can find in many leaders in the Bible. So I did an earlier video and decided to save the story of Joseph. Joseph, of course, particularly resonates with me because of what I'm going through right now. Of course, I've done videos and talked about my experience, my near-death experience in my home when I was assaulted in a swatting by Montgomery County police, racist Montgomery County cops who wanted to kill me. One of the police officers who shot me in the head. These are the scars, permanent scarring he's left in my head from the stitches. He shot me in the head with a projectile. He had said his objective was to kill me, right, with his Glock. But he ended up using his taser gun, and so he shot me with a taser dart instead, in the head, in a very crucial area. So, I survived this hate experience, this hate crime from Montgomery County police officers. I wasn't committing a crime. I was in my home. I was actually working for the federal government. And I had just told the man who sent them to my home, that's a guy, Howard University professor, Jide Wariri. I just told him that I, had this new offer on the table as director of financial crimes in a six-figure, you know, uh, position, $250,000. I had all sorts of offerings, all sorts of job offers, even prospects. A lot was going on for me. This was May, but on May 16, 2023, I was assaulted by police and based on false accusations I wasn't even aware of. So I didn't know they had plotted and schemed on how they were going to attack me. And so the story of Joseph resonates with me a lot because the story of Joseph is about how people close to him, his own brothers, right, uh, initially plotted to kill him, right? So Joseph, had, after he had revealed to his family the dream he had a vision of his whole family, including his parents, all bowing down to him, right? So indicating it was sort of symbolic. It was supposed to symbolize his status, that he would supersede his family, including his parents and all his siblings. But it instead, of rejoicing with uh, the vision Joseph shared with them, because he was younger than his older brothers. He had one younger brother, that was Benjamin. His older brothers were envious, right? And of course, many of them were his half brothers. They were envious, they were bitter, and then they planned on killing him, thinking it was arrogant. So Joseph was naive in sharing a vision that God showed him. So instead of killing him, their plan was to kill him. But one of them, the oldest, was a Reuben. He persuaded them not to kill him, that they should instead sell him into slavery. And so, of course, he was sold into slavery. The expectation was that he'd suffer in slavery and then he'd be killed. He'd be, so for a long time, and this was what they went on to tell their father. They went to lie that, well, Joseph had been killed, right, by a wild animal, right? There was a favorite tunic that the father had specific, multicolored tunic that the father had given Joseph, and so they smeared it with blood of a of an animal they'd killed, and so to deceive the father, that Joseph that was Joseph's blood and he'd been killed. So Joseph was left for dead. He was believed to be dead. At least his father thought he was dead, and eventually, the brothers thought, well, he's been sold into slavery, because they sold him to a slave. Slave traffickers, right? And they expected that, well, he wouldn't be able to survive. That he was somebody who, had been cuddled, pampered, sheltered by his father. But being sold to slavery, he wouldn't be able to survive it. He'd be killed. But they wouldn't have to be the ones who killed him. So it was believed in his household that he was dead. He was a dead man. And but of course, he went on to live. Uh, he went through another experience. Now, I'm talking about why I particularly, the story of Joseph particularly resonates with me, because I'm going through false accusations. I was almost killed, and so, but this video I'm doing, I'm not trying to personalize it. It's not about me. I'm trying to compare the story of Joseph and see if we have an American presidents who rebounded like Joseph, whose trajectory was like Joseph's. I've done other an earlier video in which I talked about other leaders like Moses, and I showed the qualities that he demonstrated from the critical success factors of the leadership, biblical leadership uh, qualities that I outlined. For instance, humility, Moses' humility. In the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says that Moses was the most humble man in all of the earth. There was nobody as humble as him, and you see it in his story. He wasn't full of hubris when God wanted to destroy the children of Israel when they rose up to play in the wilderness. He interceded on their behalf. So even though God offered Moses to create a new covenant with him, with his lineage, to instead give him the promise that he had promised Abraham and the children of Israel, Moses rejected it, right? He rejected it out of humility. It shows it wasn't about him. He still had that compassion for the people. He put the people of Israel, the children of Israel, before him, because he had led them out of the promised land. And so I've done an earlier video. You can watch that video and see how I compare, extract those leadership qualities from biblical leaders and compare it with American presidents as well. And so, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on Joseph's story, and I'm going to show how he has those key success factors that I outlined. I named 6 of them. he possesses them, and I'll look for an American president whose story, whose trajectory can match his, right? Um, because key theme in Joseph's story is that he was left for dead, right? So it was like a resurrection, right? He was left for dead. To his family, he was already dead. He was already dead, and was now living in an entirely new life in a new place. But what they thought was death was actually some form of transcendence for him, because he went to heights they never could have imagined, that he never could have imagined as well, even though he had a vision, he had a dream. Now, let me quickly outline those leadership qualities that I'd enumerated before in the earlier video. So the leadership qualities, I made them six, and it might be hard to precisely match Joseph's life with all six of them, but I'm going to try, right, in this narrative. So the first is that the leader, served as an assistant or an understudy of a leader, right? He had a period of tutelage. He understudied. He served a leader first of all. So that's the first one. The second one is the leader uh, demonstrated character and resilience in trials and hardship, and had a wilderness period, a period of isolation, a wilderness period. So that's the second uh, leadership quality in the Bible. And then the third one is uh, the humility of the leader, right? The leader had, there was, humility was a key, uh, a key component of the leader's constitution, right? He was humble. The fourth is the compassion of the leader for his people. He was very compassionate for the people he led. He had compassion. He had compassion. And then the fifth one is the leader was able to show sacrificial courage, right? Sacrificial courage in sticking with his vision. He showed sacrificial courage in achieving or persisting with his vision in terms of with respect to his vision. He had a vision, and he demonstrated sacrificial courage. And then the sixth one is that the leader was a studious learner, right? He was very knowledgeable. He had wisdom. He was wise. So that's the sixth one. Um, so the I've talked a little bit about the backstory of of Joseph, and let me finish it off. So he sold into Egypt. When he sold into Egypt, he sold as a slave to Egypt. He ends up in Potiphar's house. Potiphar was supposed to be a captain of Pharaoh's guard. Pharaoh was the ruler of Egypt, like a king, the king of Egypt, the emperor of the that was the title. He was Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Pharaoh was his title. So one of the captains of his guards was Potiphar. So Joseph had been sold to Potiphar's house. He was a slave there. And I think this is also important. I particularly wanted to do this because this is still in honor of Black History Month. And of course, Black Americans got here because they were originally sold as slaves, like wrongfully after being kidnapped. Sold, about 400 years ago. Funny enough, they were actually kidnapped and sold by fellow Africans, right? By fellow Africans on the African continent where they came from. So this is, you can see some kind of parallel in this story. So there was a reason I chose this story as well. I wanted to focus on Joseph's story. So he served as a slave to Potiphar, but he was so good at what he did. He was very humble. He showed all these crucial, key success factors, and he was humble. And then Potiphar ended up raising him to be master of his household. So even though he was a slave, even though he was actually the son of a wealthy man of promise, Jacob, but now in his status, he accepted his new status. So he showed that resignation. That's Joseph, right? And he accepted his new status as a slave, and he applied himself diligently as a slave to the point where he found favor with the his slave master, his master Potiphar, and so he becomes a Potiphar raises him to be the chief, of his household, the head of his household. Now, this is not me saying, well, that people should accept slavery or embrace slavery or anything like that. No, slavery is odious. It's abominable. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world again, right? It's been proscribed all over the world. That's not what I'm saying, and I don't see any good that comes out of slavery. But this is a Bible story of Joseph, and I'm just drawing out. I'm trying to extract key success factors in his makeup, right, in his actions and his life. So, he becomes head of Potiphar's household. However, Joseph was said to be a handsome young man, right? He was kidnapped when he was 17 years old. Yeah, like he was sold into slavery when he was 17 years old. So he was still a young man. Now, the wife of his master was attracted to him, right? And she found him attractive and wanted to seduce him. And so many times he'd persist, try to get him to sleep with her. But he refused, saying, well, he didn't want to disobey God. He feared God, and it would be a violation of his principles as someone who feared God. That's one. And secondly, it would be showing disloyalty. It would be treacherous for him to do so because his master, Potiphar, trusted him. And of course, the most sacred thing to a man, would be his wife, right? That would be off limits. And so he stuck to his principles. So you see, this is very crucial. You see that even though Joseph had reason to despair, he had reason to be miserable, he had reasons because he'd been sold wrongfully by his own siblings, right? As a man who held promise, right? Who had just received a vision from God. But now here he was a slave. He was not despondent. He didn't hate God. He didn't reject God, right? He still had faith in God. So that's a sacrificial courage, right? In the vision. He still stuck to the vision that God had shown him, a vision of his greatness, that his family would bow to him. So he didn't reject God. He didn't deny God. He stuck with his principles and obeyed God, right? He wanted to honor God and refused to sleep with uh, Potiphar's wife, with his master's wife. A cynical person, an opportunist, would say, well, perhaps if he sleeps with his master's wife, he would be her favorite and should bestow favors upon him, right? But he didn't do that, right? He stuck with his principles, and what she ended up doing was she ended up accusing him of attempted rape. One day she tried to sleep with him and in her bedroom, and as he fled, she tore his garment and it was in her hands, and she held it as proof, false evidence, right? Fabricated evidence. She called the household and her husband and said, well, see the guy's robe. She tore it, that he was trying to rape her. So he ends up being thrown into prison for a crime he didn't commit. As an innocent man, he was lucky he wasn't beheaded, but he was thrown into prison. So providence, God had his, designs. So he was thrown into prison, and in prison again, he came to the notice of the chief warden who favored him. And while he was in prison, uh, two courtiers, two people who worked for Pharaoh, for the king, were thrown in as well. The chief baker of the king and the butlers of the king. Now, while Joseph was there, Joseph he was uh, he was assigned to serve those two people. Like the warden assigned him to serve the butler and the baker. Now, one day he saw that they were in despair, and he was concerned for them, and he asked them, why were they in despair? And so they told him, right? They told him that they had these terrible dreams. The baker told him of his dream, and the butler told him of his dream. Now, Joseph had a gift, right? He had a gift of of seeing visions and interpreting dreams, because remember, God had shown him a dream, a vision of his future, and he shared it with his siblings, but they wanted to kill him because of that. So he remained connected with his talent, a gift that God had given him. So he used it, even though he was in prison, was in a very bad situation. He didn't allow himself to get depressed, right? He didn't. He didn't give himself suicidal thoughts, or he didn't act out trying to harm people, right? So instead, he still chose to serve people, to show compassion for people, and to use his talent to help people. So he interpreted their dreams, and he told the butler that, well, in 3 days that he will be restored to the service of Pharaoh and serving him wine. And but the baker, he told him that in 3 days he'd lose his head, right? And things came to pass as he said. Now, something significant though, he told the butler, right, who would be restored, that he should remember him. And that was the first time we see Joseph, pining for home, right? He was, he told him of how he had been wrongfully thrown in, sold and thrown in prison. And he asked for the favor of the butler to remind him to help him get out of prison. Uh, what we would learn in the book of Genesis, the story of Joseph, the narrative is in the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. Uh, the butler would forget him, would forget all about Joseph for 2 years. It would take a crisis in Pharaoh, right? It would take a crisis in Egypt when Pharaoh was having nightmares, and none of his magicians could explain the nightmares that tormented him, so he couldn't sleep. He was distressed. And eventually, the butler remembered this was 2 years after 2 years of his meeting Joseph, and he's being released, being restored to the service of Pharaoh. He remembered that, well, in prison, he met Joseph, and Joseph had the gift of interpreting dreams. And so, of course, um, you know, Pharaoh asked for him to be dressed, and to be brought to the palace. So Joseph went in just one day, in 24 hours, in just one day. It didn't take a long time. He suffered for 13 years through slavery and through jail, 13 years. But in one day, his whole life changed, right? Just from the proper referral, right? So uh, the butler made a right referral to the king, and there was a need. The king had a need, and Joseph was able to satisfy that need, and he interpreted the dream of Pharaoh properly, and he also used his wisdom, the gift of his wisdom, to provide a solution. So Joseph provided a solution for Pharaoh, and so Pharaoh ended up making him the ruler of Egypt. That only Pharaoh was over him in the throne. So the position uh, Joseph ended up having, because by way of his skill, was is equivalent to being the prime minister, right? Think about England. England has a king, King Charles, but he's not the head of government. He's ceremonial. He's a monarch, right? He's the ceremonial head, but the head of the government is the prime minister, Sir Keir Starmer, right? Who's leader of the Labour Party. So uh, Joseph became governor or prime minister of Egypt, the most powerful land in all of in the world at that time. So you see, and of course, events happened. There was now famine in the land of Canaan, where his family was, his father and his siblings, where they were, and it forced them to come and seek uh, food in Egypt. And eventually they ended up bowing down to him, right? Just like he said, and he provided for them. And that's how the children of Israel all ended up being in Egypt. And we know the story of what happened later on. So that's the story of Joseph. Now, I'm going to draw out the key, how he demonstrated all those six elements, right? Uh, the first one was leadership, right? Uh, Having some sort of understudying or having tutelage under a leader, right? Serving under a leader. So obviously that's where he was a servant in the household of Potiphar, the first person he served. And when he was in prison as well, he was assigned to serve those two butlers, sorry, the two courtiers for Pharaoh, the chief baker the um, and the butler. So he served, he was a man of service. He was assigned service, right? And second is they go through a period of trial, right? They show character and resilience in trial. I told the story of how he was sold wrongfully into slavery. So that was a long period of trial. And then he was wrongfully accused and he was put in prison. So he was alone. He was away from his family. And in all of this, he showed his character, his that he remained obedient to God. And of course, he wasn't bitter despite what he was going through. He still had faith and he continued to serve. He continued to do his work, And so you see, he went through a period of hardship, a wilderness period, 13 years in slavery, and then, of course, in his time in prison. In the modern world, people don't like hardship. People don't like trials. They think if when they're going through trials in today's world, they think that's a sign everything is wrong. They don't see it that maybe it's some sort of preparation that they're being refined and it's preparation for success. That it's there's light at the tunnel. That it's just a process for them, and that's leading them into their success. People don't see that, but we see in the Bible, we see this in the story of Joseph that his success was there. Nothing could stop it. But he was taken through this process of trial, the wilderness period. And the third factor, of course, is humility. He remained humble. We can see Joseph's humility in the way he resigned himself to his fate. He accepted his fate so that even though he was someone who was born to a wealthy man, a man of promise, that's Jacob, when he was wrongfully sold into slavery and he found himself in Potiphar's house, he 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 did his best as a slave, as a servant, that to the point that Potiphar made him head of his household, the chief servant, chief slave, right? The same thing when he was sold into prison and became an inmate, a prisoner, right? He, even though he was wrongfully accused, right? He was in prison wrongfully. He inspired confidence in the chief warden again that he was entrusted with the care of the butler the uh, and the chief baker. So right, so he had that humility, right? He had that humility. And then the other thing is compassion. Yeah, we see the compassion he had because when the chief butler and the chief baker in prison, when they were distressed, he had compassion for them. He didn't say, well, after all, here's a prisoner. He didn't care. He was concerned about their distress and he wanted to help them. What he did for them, he interpreted their dreams. He did it for free. He used his gift for them, and he did it for free, right? So he had that compassion for people. And the same thing when his brothers, his siblings, and you can check the story in the Bible. I didn't want to go into the details, but he had compassion for his siblings, the people who had wronged him, so that when there was famine in their lands in Canaan and they were forced to seek food in Egypt, he decided to bring them all over and settle them in Egypt. And all the Israelites eventually settled in Goshen. So he settled them in Egypt. He brought them to stay with him. He was now prime minister. He didn't seek revenge, right? He didn't seek revenge. He didn't try and harm them. He had compassion for their suffering, right? He missed his siblings. He didn't try to seek revenge. And so you see that's compassion. Then, of course, there's also the sacrificial courage, right, in his vision. And I've talked about that. Um, through through it all, right, he had his vision. He knew his vision. God had shown him his vision as a young man. And uh, prematurely, he shared this vision with and out of night, he was naive. He shared this vision with his siblings who, they ended up being jealous. Um, when I try to think about my situation, what happened to me, I remember how, I had just been offered something, right? And it was tentative. and I was in a rush, and I shared it with Jide Iwarire, the man who wrote a perjured emergency evaluation petition and reacted and went to go and tell lies. My family, they've said, look, when you got these new positions, these new offers, why did you tell this Jide Iwarire? It may have triggered envy in him. You don't know what he's going through. There are people who are like that. They're very jealous. You do not know when you tell him that, wow, that you're rising, you're doing so well in the U.S., in the government, and then they've offered you this new position, and you're doing so well. He may have become bitter. Maybe that was something he wanted. Maybe he may have triggered some kind of envy in him that was demonic, and so he did what he did to try and sabotage my career. This is what my family believes. So similarly, Joseph, was naive, even though he wasn't trying to brag, he wasn't trying to be boastful. I wasn't trying to be boastful towards Jide when I told him the offer had just gotten the job prospects, the new offers I had several on the table, and I told him, and he knew, right? I was being offered an attorney's position in the government. So many, even though I didn't have a license, they said, they let me start working as an attorney, right? So many different positions that I was being offered, um, you know. But I told this guy, but he was very jealous. So this was what happened to Joseph, right? Joseph shared his vision, the promise God had shown him. He shared it with his siblings who were jealous and wanted to kill him, and they sold him into slavery. So um, he had his, but despite that, despite the conditions, what he was put through, the hardship that he had to endure and go through, he did not waver in his devotion to God and his belief that that God was going to God was going to prove Himself to him, and that his vision of one day, uh, his vision would one day materialize. And he continued to do his work. He showed sacrifice, whether it was in Pharaoh's house, right? Pharaoh's household. His duties were to serve Pharaoh, to be loyal. When the wife wanted to sleep, Pharaoh's wife, sorry, when Potiphar wanted to sleep with him, and Potiphar's wife wanted to sleep with him, and she tried to seduce him. He sacrificed, his carnal desires, right? And he sacrificed his carnal desires and to stick to his scruples, right? Because he understood that, well, if he if he fell, right? If he fell and if he didn't uphold his integrity, it was God that would be upset with him. It's God that was going to bless him, right? It was God who was going to bless him with that vision that he had been given, the promise he'd been given, and he knew that would offend God. So he sacrificed, right? He sacrificed his carnal desires, and stuck with the vision, right? With the vision, he showed courage, and he didn't relent even to the point of death. The result of the false allegations against him could have been death, right? But he didn't fall, he didn't backslide. He stuck with his principles. And of course, um, there's, apart from sacrificial courage, there's also the studious learning, right? So studious learning, we don't see where he went to school or he was learning anything, but we see that he was learned in his demonstration of wisdom, in his ability to interpret dreams. So the wisdom, the knowledge he had was a gift, right? So, and this was it was critical to his success, because it was his demonstration of his gift of understanding dreams and interpreting dreams and providing a solution, being a problem solver. So that's studious learning. The reason we study is not just, to just study, to just, cram our head with books. No, it's so we can be better problem solvers. So he had his process of learning, right? We're not told how he learned. We're told he had a gift from God. But, the result, the consequence, the result of being studious, right, of being filled with knowledge, was demonstrated in the solution he provided Egypt, and how he was a very effective manager of Egypt's resources. So he did. He checks all the boxes. Now, so the hard part, right? Who went through a an experience like Joseph? Which of America's presidents went through an experience like Joseph's in which he was left for dead? It's very difficult. When I consider, I don't know any president, right? Just one, and I decided to pick one, and it might come as a surprise, um, because in American politics, right, we see our presidents, right, seem to have a trajectory, and it's upward, right? It's upward. There are no chinks in the almost linear progression, right, of an American president's political life, right? Uh, any little scandal, any little thing that's exposed to the public, that career is over, right? That's it. They don't get any comebacks. America, we love the comeback person, the person who falls and rises again. We like that in our in real life, in people who are working, doing jobs and things like that. We like that story of the person who who comes back after his life has been in peril. But we don't like it in our presidents. It appears we don't like our president's political trajectory to have to go down and then come back. That remembers this guy? There was a guy, was it Edward? I've forgotten his last name. He was a senator, and he was a promising senator, and he would have been, he was running at the time Barack Obama was first running, and he would have been first choice for. He was from North Carolina, I think, somewhere in the South, and he would have been running mate with Barack Obama. But a scandal broke out that he was having an affair. He's, and he had his wife, Ed. I think his first name was Edward, Senator. I can't remember. When I remember, I'm gonna make a note. But when this scandal came out that he was having an affair, and that was the end of his career. It never revived. He never came back. You don't get a comeback, right, from a near death experience in American politics, right? It's America. The trajectory of American presidents is very scripted. It's very scripted. It's rigid. There can't be any chinks in the linear progression. Uh, However, so you don't see it in our favorite president, uh, uh, Abraham Lincoln, not in anybody. However, there was one person that I thought, in terms of a death experience in politics, I am not talking about character or anything like that, or being a person of faith. I don't know this president's faith, but this president had a situation where he was left for dead, and he has a record. He's the only president who's ever been convicted of a felony, right? So he not just one, he had 34 felonies. Uh, Americans, you'd expect there's no comeback from that. There's no coming back. He had his mugshot taken, but this person came back and he won an almost impossible, second term. Prior to him, only Grover Cleveland had been in office, been kicked out of office, only to come back again and defeat the person who defeated him. President Donald Trump, who was number 45, he lost to Joe Biden. He didn't get to defeat Joe Biden, but he defeated the vice president of President Joe Biden, number 46, and he's our 47th president again. Uh, President Trump was, he had a near death, more than a near death experience in real life, because he survived an assassination attempt miraculously. It was weird. Um, he was grazed. It was just him moving his head that meant the bullet didn't go through his temple, but it instead, chipped his ear. Right, the failed assassination attempt. He had more than one. But the bullet actually touched him, but it didn't pierce his skull. That was one. And then there were these scandals, right? He had all these scandals. He was humiliated, just like Joseph. You see how Joseph was humiliated, right? His brothers humiliated him, being sold into slavery. You can imagine the things that happened. He was sold as a slave. He suffered for 13 years. It was because his brothers sold him, right, sold him as a slave, that he experienced all the humiliations, the degradations that he experienced in Egypt, that he was falsely accused again by Potiphar's wife when he was doing what was good, and then he was thrown into prison for something he didn't do. So he suffered. 13 years is a long time, right? So President Trump was, he went through, a lot of humiliation that no one would expect he'd be able to come back from, right? So I guess he's changed the trajectory in a way. Um, he, he was convicted, right, in New York of 34 felonies, was actually just waiting for his sentencing. But fortunately for him, he'd won the elections, and so he wasn't, he didn't get a prison sentence because, he's president. He became president of the United States. Of course, there was the issue of the mishandling of the classified material, where in which there was a uh, special prosecutor, you know, special counsel, right, that was going after him, that was investigating and had already filed charges as Jack Smith, the you know, special prosecutor. Jack Smith had filed charges against him already. There were multiple charges he was facing. And then he also was, his involvement with the insurrection on, January 6, 2021. There was the Georgia investigations. There was a trial ongoing with regard to, corrupting the electoral process in Georgia, right? So there was a lot he was facing, and miraculously, he pulls off an election win, right? He wins, and he's the 47th president as well. So that was like a political death that he experienced. He experienced a political death and sort of a resurrection, right? Because his adversaries, nobody would have expected that he would be able to pull through. He'd be able to, get back with everything he was facing. So just like Joseph, but he was just, all that hardship, all that stress was just building momentum for him, and just strengthening him. And he's number 47. So that's it. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.